Going then. Well, it's a joy to be in Montgomery again, and also a joy to be sharing this with Cecil. Had great respect, Brother May, and a long-time relationship. Earl Kimbrough has called J.M. Barnes probably the greatest gospel preacher in Alabama's 200-year history. I think he is correct. No other single person has impacted the history of Churches of Christ in Alabama more than J.M. Barnes. He was an educator, evangelist, and writer. He started and taught in 3 different schools. He planted the first congregations in Montgomery and Birmingham, as well as in other communities in Alabama. He traveled extensively in Tennessee and Texas, where he had a significant impact on Churches of Christ in the late 19th century through his protracted meetings, as well as his articles in the Gospel Advocate and Firm Foundation, among other papers. Though there is much that would commend the study of Barnes, including how closely he and Lipscomb mirrored each other, I will focus on what is probably his most famous series of articles in the Gospel Advocate, entitled The Apostolic Church. The first article appeared in 1891, and the last in 1895, with over 100 articles. Requested to write a series of articles on the identity of the church, Barnes pursued this request as a search for the apostolic church. According to Barnes, the apostolic ecclesia is the body which is the same in faith and practice with those in the days of the apostles. He uses ecclesia because he doesn't like to use the word church. He thinks church is not a good translation, so he thinks ecclesia is just transliterated, like baptizo, that was his opinion. He does not, of course, mean a reproduction of everything any church in the New Testament practiced, as those congregations were flawed. Rather, he is seeking, quote, the institution described by the apostles, for the apostolic ecclesia is one that conforms to apostolic teaching. As the series played out over 4 years, it was clear that this was a momentous time in the history of the Restoration Movement. With the establishment of the Alabama Christian Missionary Cooperation in 1886 and the increasing use of instrumental music in the ecclesia, as well as the rise of ecumenicism and the female leadership in some quarters, the early 1890s were a critical time. Barnes' search for the apostolic church comes at a tense moment, when the division between the Christian church and Churches of Christ is growing, substantial, and becoming increasingly clear. Barnes attempts to arrest this division by identifying the true apostolic church in contrast to competing traditions, including not only denominational competitors like Catholics, Methodists, Presbyterians, Baptists, but also the Christian church, the newest denomination. The search proceeded along a clear line of biblical authority. To make his point, he uses the metaphor of a builder. Just as Moses built the tabernacle and Solomon built the temple, so Christ received his instructions from the Father, gave it to the apostles, and then gave them the Holy Spirit to make them able to build correctly. In this way, the apostles were given, like Moses and Solomon, a pattern by Jesus, and the apostles followed the orders of the great builder, Jesus the Messiah. Consequently, whatever the apostles practiced and taught is a model by which we also erect a temple, and whatever is not practiced and taught by the apostles is rejected as an add-on or a subtraction from the temple pattern. Specifically, quote, Jesus gave the apostles the words they used none other. We have these words and we should use none others. The prohibitive function of silence, rooted in the specificity of the pattern, Barnes believes the New Testament provides, is profound. Have you anything in your religion which Jesus did not build into it? Barnes asked. Silence is a profound aspect of the pattern. Is the silence worth anything? Is not God's almighty silence itself awful? Of course, it is not a mere silence, but a lack of authorization. For example, Barnes also asks, where did they get the authority? Does God allow any and all men to put in the house any and all things they choose? And Scripture's silence ranged from, quote, elaborately built and elegantly finished and costly buildings with steeples, stuccoed walls, frescoed ceilings, and stained glass, to confessionals, mourner's bench for sinners, instrumental music, and various fundraisers, to strawberry, oyster, or ice cream supper, or a Sunday school picnic. But as Barnes notes, not one word is said about these things from that whole list, right? Including ice cream suppers. Not one word is said about these things in the Lord's last will and testament. So Barnes searches for the apostolic church by attending to the writing and teaching of the apostles who received the pattern from Jesus Christ. When we follow the pattern, the church in AD 1892 should be the same as at Troas, Ephesus, Corinth, Jerusalem, and Antioch. All churches of Christ, I'm quoting him here, all churches of Christ are one and the same in all times, in all countries, in all languages, under all circumstances. When the church follows the apostolic teaching, which tells it how to build God's temple according to the pattern, then the church is uniformly the same. The first mark of the apostolic church is conversion according to the apostolic model. The pattern for conversion in Acts, of course, includes baptism, and this is the means by which the called get into the ecclesia. Once baptized, disciples become part of the ecclesia, and the conduct of the ecclesia is another mark of the authentic Church of Christ. Disciples are committed to gather every first day of the week to break bread, and the whole ecclesia gathers in one place. According to Barnes, this assembly included prayer, breaking bread, contribution for poor saints, singing, edifying the ecclesia, teaching unbelievers and unlearned, withdrawing from wrongdoers, and restoring the penitent. While the new economy is not one of law like the Jewish law, but of the Spirit, those who are led by the Spirit of God follow the Spirit's teachings and examples. Apostolic teaching, led by the Spirit, led the saints anciently to meet together on the first day of the week to break bread and to press forward in the discharge of duty. The church is an ecclesia, that is, a gathered people or an assembly. And when the church meets as ecclesia, they practice the things of God as a corporate body according to the apostolic command and example. The third mark of an apostolic church is its organization. An apostolic ecclesia was governed by a plurality of elders, served by deacons and deaconesses, and supported the work of evangelists. As bishop or elder, a bishop or elder is the overseer of the ecclesia at one place, and he has others in the same congregation coordinate and co-equal with himself in every sense. They are discharged with caring, feeding, and supervising the flock, which includes ruling, teaching, and discipline. The apostolic ecclesia depends upon, I'm quoting here, depends upon nothing for its growth and perpetuity as upon its elders, who are homegrown and developed from within the congregation itself. Also, according to Barnes, there was a public diaconia that serves the church, and in this there were men and women. Barnes understood Phoebe to be a deacon of the church. Does this surprise you? He asked. Well, he continued, I'm trying to find the apostles' doctrine, not the doctrine of men. At the same time, Barnes is quite clear about the difference between the private and public work of women, as well as their required silence in the ecclesia. Women are forbidden to teach or even ask questions in the ecclesia. They must be totally silent. If a woman does otherwise, according to Barnes, she is an infidel. Women may, however, teach privately, like Priscilla, and serve in other capacities. This narrow restriction from the ecclesia did not, for Barnes, demean women or isolate them. Rather, he called them to serve as deacons, to labor in the Lord as teachers in their daily lives and homes, to care for their homes and families, and to dress modestly. Nevertheless, Barnes insisted that women should have no public role in both the ecclesia and society. Her role was domestic and private. While the ecclesia supported the work of evangelists, Barnes did not believe evangelists were part of the organization of the ecclesia, except in terms of planting and nurturing it until elders were appointed. I'll comment more about that in a little bit. A fourth mark of the Apostolic Church is its way of life in fasting, prayer, and temperance. This is no mere addendum for Barnes. It is not alone sufficient to be baptized right, he says. The candidate must arise to walk in newness of life. This included regular, individual, and communal moments of prayer and fasting. After citing several texts, Barnes writes that the religion of Jesus Christ calls for earnestness, devotion, consecration, and denial, to such an extent that, quote, fasting is not a matter of indifference with God. It disturbed Barnes that scores of people would rush to feast such as an ice cream supper, about which the Lord never opened his mouth, but no one could be induced to attend a fast which the Lord had ordained. A fifth mark of the Apostolic Church is its unity. Jesus wants all his followers, his ecclesia, to be one, which entails having the same mind and speaking the same things without divisions. Unfortunately, divisions abounded at the time Barnes wrote. I know a people, he says, quote, that started out with Reformation printed on every banner and a full return to the Bible floating in the breeze. Their watchword and battle cry was a "Thus saith the Lord" for all faith and practice. Where the Bible speaks, we will speak. Where the Bible is silent, we will be silent. But now, divisions are found on every hand. After a half century of wondrous success, and these divisions have rent the body of workers and weakened their power by contention and internal strife. For Barnes, the primary examples of this division are the society, the organ, and the public role of women in the ecclesia. These matters trouble the churches. For Barnes, this is a matter of doing what the apostles did not authorize and doing something the apostles forbade. And people did not learn these practices from the apostles, but from somewhere or someone else. According to Barnes, it is evident, I'm quoting, it is evident that the Spirit of Christ does not dwell in them, because if it did, they would do and teach like Christ. Barnes was deeply troubled by these divisions, but he thought they were necessary. While the firm foundation may err, Barnes thought, it always errs on the safe side, on the right. And Barnes has patience with anyone, I'm quoting, with anyone whom he thinks wrong if he is trying to get to the Bible. But as for the big D's, the disciples of Christ, they are the object of God's wrath, who magnified their own additions and made some small God's orders. Consequently, they are, quote, the most pernicious of all the sects upon the face of the globe. Barnes would rather have his own children, quote, join the Methodist than those people, because they would do less harm. It appears that Barnes' series on the Apostolic Church, after some 100 articles, ended abruptly. He did not complete the series. Instead, Barnes found himself in the midst of controversy. In particular, among others, 3 points engendered considerable discussion among the readers of the Gospel Advocate, including the editor, David Lipscomb. The 3 issues I will address are 1, the role of the evangelist, 2, the undivided nature of the assembly, and 3, the laying on of hands. Barnes believed evangelists were fundamentally church planters who nurtured the body of disciples and trained potential elders until the moment the evangelist ordained them. The evangelist then moved on to another field to repeat the cycle. This was the function of Timothy and Titus. And it is the duty of the contemporary evangelist, and none should shift the responsibility from their shoulders. Titus was left to train and ordain elders. That's still the role of the evangelist. Consequently, Barnes did not think evangelists should locate and become hired, salaried preachers for a particular congregation. This, he believed, was a change in the apostolic order. Now, I'm quoting, "Now if you or I would change God's order no more than Nadab and Abihu," Barnes warned, "God has no use for us." So located preachers belongs in the same category as Nadab and Abihu. Right? Barnes feared the future that was eventually realized among churches of Christ. "I am afraid of college men," he wrote, even though he ran a college. "Not because they are educated or ungodly, but because congregations said, 'Send to Nashville to get a preacher.' This neglects the function of the ecclesia," according to Barnes. Quote, "Is not the ecclesia the place to manufacture preachers? When people import a preacher to do the very things which God has imposed upon them, they barter off at a big price and pay themselves for doing it their opportunities for gaining strength." For example, he complained that the elders in Montgomery hired a preacher who did their work for them because they did not have time to do it with their own busy schedules. Barnes suggested the elders resign. And to the evangelist, he said, evangelists should, without doubt, teach, train, educate men for bishops. This would make every ecclesia a Bible school and would cause all who would aspire to the place of bishop to study for the ministry. We must reform, he said, or be sectarians. Barnes also believed that the ecclesia is constituted by an undivided assembly. Barnes not only opposed the Sunday school institution with its superintendents and lesson plans, but he also opposed any Bible classes that divided the assembly, the ecclesia. For Barnes, 1 Corinthians 14 was quite clear. The whole church is expected to be present. One man was not expected to do all the teaching, preaching, and talking. Women were to be silent. They could not even ask questions. And other men present were to judge the correctness of what was taught. The work for the ecclesia when they came together is this: praying, singing, breaking bread, teaching the ecclesia, teaching unbelievers and unlearned, edifying the body of Christ, laying by in store treasury for the poor, withdrawing from the disorderly, and preaching. That's it. Away with all other things, Barnes added. Only these are in the book. Barnes thought the Sunday school or special classes for children outside of the ecclesia or other than in the ecclesia was contrary to the pattern given in 1 Corinthians 14. I'm quoting here, where do you get anything for the ecclesia to teach the children separate from other people? Barnes asked. There is a God-made order for teaching children. Why leave that and make a new one? Children are taught at home by their father. That is God's order. Who can imagine that they can change God's order? Consequently, when the ecclesia comes together, the whole congregation must be together. I'm quoting, not split up and divided into and subdivided after the manner of Sunday schools. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 23. This is God's order. Though many appeal to sanctified common sense to justify Sunday schools and divided assemblies, Barnes believed that has burdened that idea, sanctified common sense, that has burdened the ecclesia of God with every error under which she now groans from the Big Papa at Rome down to the last church social supper held in the United States. I am afraid of common sense, he said, because whose common sense are we to follow? God's common sense is the only safe common sense. Mine is human. Thirdly, Barnes raises a long-forgotten controversy in the late 19th century, though it was hotly debated at that time. Barnes, along with T.W. Brents and Jesse Sewell and James A. Harding, believed elders and evangelists should be appointed or ordained through the laying on of hands, fasting, and prayer. David Lipscomb and E.A. Elam, among others, thought such a practice was unnecessary and a misapplication of Scripture. According to Hebrews 6, verses 1 and 2, as Barnes understood it, the laying on of hands is associated with three other doctrines that we must believe and practice, like the doctrine of baptisms. Are these all real doctrines and integral parts of the religion of Jesus Christ? They are, most assuredly. The apostles practiced the laying on of hands, and it is what those who continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine continue to do. They must lay hands on no man suddenly. They must have a doctrine of laying on of hands. And they must lay hands on those who enter upon special work, like elders and evangelists. Should someone say there is no obligation inherent in this example or practice? Barnes asks, who relieved man or released him from continuing steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine? Indeed, it has ever been God's command, add not. Take nothing from my word. In conclusion, it is as if the search for the apostolic church came to a screeching halt in the light of these three disagreements. Because in 1896, the article in 1896, everything's about these three disagreements. I mean, it's just article back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And Barnes stops writing about the apostolic church. Nevertheless, Barnes' vision of the apostolic church was unrequited. Quote, do you know any congregation that do the Lord's way? I know none. Think about that. Is there any congregation that does the Lord's way? No, I know none. But when or if the ecclesia makes a full return to obedience, as great results may be expected from the preaching of the gospel, as when inspired men moved upon the earth. The ecclesia will again be an irresistible force, fearless in the face of sin, and will never, never cower when iniquity is present. But it appeared to Barnes, the Church of God had not yet reached that level of faithfulness, even among churches of Christ in Alabama. So the search for the apostolic church becomes a dead end. Because when the debate begins, well, does that belong, or does that belong? Does that belong? There's no agreement. And Barnes apparently gives up the writing of the series. Yeah. Thank you.